Okay, welcome. Um, I'm coming on a little bit early because it has been a weird week with things related to Facebook. And so there's always the potential for technical issues when you do live streaming like this, as I've mentioned before. So I always come on a little bit early in order to make sure that it's okay. So welcome. If you are seeing this right now, probably just on my website or on YouTube, and you can see me and hear me okay, if you would please type a Y into the chat box. And Facebook is still acting up, so I have to manually turn it on here. So bear with me here for a second. All right, so as far as I can tell, we are now live everywhere. We are live on YouTube, we are live on Facebook, and we are live on my website. If you are watching, I'm on a little bit early here. We'll start the pre-show officially in a couple of minutes, and then you'll see the timer on the video. But if you are watching right now, I'd love it if you could, number one, type in a Y in the chat box if you can see me and hear me okay. And if you would, say hello, let me know your name and where you're from in the world. And I would appreciate that. And then I'll have to look over here from time to time to see what's going on here. So we have David from Thailand. Welcome again, David. I appreciate you tuning in, especially with the time zone differences, and I'm thrilled that you're with me. Penny from Kansas. I'm loving these weekly reminders about what the truth really is. I'm very happy to hear that, Penny. I'm really enjoying doing this myself. I don't know if you know, it kind of dates me, but when I was a kid, there was a TV show that was called The A-Team. And they had all these wild kind of adventures, and there was this character that would say, I really love it when a plan comes together, because they'd have these wild plans and they usually didn't work. And so this has been a plan of mine for a long time. I'm really enjoying it. This is episode 3, as you know, so I'm glad that you're getting benefit. Thanks, Penny, for telling me that you can hear everything. Liz from Florida. Once again, thanks, Robert. This support is much appreciated. Welcome, Liz. I'm happy that you're here. Hello, Clark, on YouTube, and good. I'm glad that the video and the audio is good. These are my Harry Potter computer glasses that I use when I'm using computers, in case you're wondering. I'll take them off when I'm doing the main show because I only need them when I'm using the computer. Welcome to Marion. Clark and Marion okay, Clark from Florida, Marion from Oklahoma City. Welcome. I'm thrilled that you're here. And I'm glad to see that everything appears to be working. Cool. And I'm looking, let's see, what do we got here on Facebook? Lisa from New Jersey. Hi, Robert. I'm excited to be here live. I'm excited too, as I said before, if you heard me. David from Washington. I see and hear you fine. Thank you. Welcome again, David. You've been a frequent participant in many things in my sphere of influence lately. Appreciate that. Excited to see it. Let's see, what else do we have here? I'm sorry, I always forget how to pronounce your name. Maybe you could type it in and show me again phonetically and I'll remember it. But Mayor is not the proper one, from Ireland. Thanks for doing this, Robert. I know there's an unusual pronunciation you've shared with me before, but I just can't remember. I'm sorry. If you'd be willing to type it in phonetically again here, I'll make a note so that I remember in the future. Maura Rose. Okay. Welcome. I'm always thrilled to have anybody here, but especially when it's global. And that's one of the great gifts of the internet, you know, is that we can reach people that share and teach and do things like I do. I have the blessing of being able to reach people all over the world, which would not have been possible when I was a kid. Wouldn't really have even been possible when I was a young adult. So it's another thing I'm very, very grateful for. Cool. All right, I'm actually going to make a note here. of Mora Rose for the future, since you are a frequent participant. Forgive me for looking away from the screen. It's a thing I have to do because I don't have a producer of this show. I'm doing all of it myself, so I have to look away sometimes. All right, let's see. Close this. Clark, more than thrilled to be here. Awesome. By the way, I can't remember if I told you this before. You know, if you text, and particularly if you use text with kids, you know, everybody abbreviates everything, and there are these funny abbreviations, and a lot of them I still don't know what they are. I have to ask my kids, what does that mean, you know? But I like saying super awesome a lot. And so I abbreviated super awesome to sauce. And then when I'm interacting with people that know that, or my kids or whatever, sometimes I'll just say sauce and they know that it means super awesome. Or sometimes I have a little image, a picture of spaghetti sauce, you know, it's red sauce. And I'll just put the image. So if you ever see me say sauce, or you see an image of like tomato sauce, that's what I mean, super awesome. So Clark Walters, thanks for suggesting Westworld. Let's see, where are we here? Okay, I gotta start my timer here, but it's going to, I started a little late, so it's gonna be a little bit longer than that, shorter than that for when the show begins. Thank you for suggesting Westworld. Enjoying it? Yeah, Westworld season 2 just has 2 episodes. The second episode in season 2 was Sunday night, which I've been watching. So we'll see. In terms of the Ultimate Freedom Experience, the Ultimate Freedom Teachings, that's what I do. That's my flagship, my most important offering, the way I can help people most these days. Westworld season 1. Despite violence and what I consider to be disrespect and abuse of women, which is part of the story, which is not my favorite thing to see, but it's part of the story and it makes sense within the context of the story. But that aside, there's so much in Westworld season 1 that supports the Ultimate Freedom Experience, the Ultimate Freedom Teachings, the seeing of the truth with a capital T, a lot of which we're starting to talk about here on this show. So if you haven't seen Westworld season 1, again, be prepared for the violence, and if you're a woman, to see some things like that, but it's very, very supportive. So Clark, I'm glad that you're enjoying it. Welcome again. Tom from the Pittsburgh area, welcome. Thrilled to see you here. Those of you that are participating, I'll mention this again later, that are participating on my website, we had technical issues in episode 1 and in episode 2, so I changed how I'm doing that. And I feel pretty good that we're not going to have any issues this week, fingers crossed. So if you participated before, you'll probably notice that it's looking differently. And hopefully there won't be any issues. And cool. Helly from Denmark, welcome. Hi, Robert. How is the weather? The weather here is great. We're spring here, so in late April, early May, the weather where I live is during the days it's 60s or 70 Fahrenheit, and then at night it cools down as we move more towards the summer. Day and evening both heat up, but today it's a beautiful sunny day, blue sky, beautiful weather. Where I live, we have all of the seasons in Charlottesville, Virginia. It gets pretty hot and humid in the summer for a couple of months. Otherwise, we have all the seasons, and they can get difficult, but they tend to be pretty mellow in terms of the winter, and the spring and fall are gorgeous. And so, anyway, that's the weather. Lisa, loved Westworld season 1. Yes, way to go. I think now I've watched that season 1, and in case you don't know, it was 10 episodes and they're all about an hour, so it's about a 10-hour investment to get through the whole season. I think I've watched it 5 times now, the entire first season, and I love it and I appreciate it from a story perspective, as a production perspective. the way it's done, how it's done, and then the story's just amazing, and there's so much truth, like the Matrix movie 1. There is so much truth in it, and so many things where it really hammers things home, including some of the kinds of things we're going to be talking about today and in future episodes. Lisa has watched it twice. Okay, cool. Martin is here. Martin, would you mind telling me where you're from? I'm just always curious. What is your favorite piece of technology or software at the moment? For what, Martin? That's kind of a big question. I use software and technology for all kinds of different things. I don't know if you mean for live streaming a show like this, but if you can get more specific. Martin's from Dublin, Ireland. Great. I have not been to Ireland yet. I've been to various parts of England, but I have not yet been to Ireland, but I assume that I will be someday. It's on my list, as are Italy, Greece, Spain, Thailand, David, and certain other parts of the world that I feel very drawn to visiting, so we'll see what happens. So, Martin, is there something specific in terms of technology or software? Let's see, anyone else? Clark, I had several copies of The Secret, which I happily threw away. Okay. Let's see, we don't really have time to go into detail on this, but you might find it interesting to know that I was there at the beginning of the making of The Secret, and I was actually one of the first people that had been targeted to be interviewed by for that, to be in that movie. They didn't realize when I was on the list and was interviewed that I didn't believe in the law of attraction, so my interview was cut and I never appeared. But I was there when it started. I was there when most of the interviews were done, and then watched the whole thing evolve with the group of people that I was part of. 2 minutes and we'll be starting, even though the clock says 4 minutes because I started it late. Maura Rose would love you to come to Ireland, Robert, sooner rather than later. I appreciate that. There's so many places I'd like to visit, and my preference, but whatever, my preference is to go there to be able to share and to be able to teach, and then also be able to explore. That's been that's been a pattern of mine for many years, and I've been very grateful to have that opportunity in different countries all over the world. So we'll see what happens day by day. Martin, I'm not sure for what. I guess something that really floats your boat. I apologize, Martin. I'm something of a geek, and I have so many software tools that I use for so many different things, and I really appreciate them for the different things that they use, but the way my mind works, which is to take things pretty literally, nothing is popping in terms of what's my favorite or, because I'm a techie and I'm a geek, and I like to automate things and make things simple and have technology really improve my life. So I use 20 zillion different tools. Happy to answer the question if you can be more specific, but with general, there's too many, so sorry. Okay, let's see. Anything else? We have Dura, sorry if I mispronounced that. Thanks for making yourself available, Robert. I've read all but one of your books. Things are getting better, but not extraordinary yet. We have about 1 minute, so I'll just say quickly to that. This is a journey. My bias and my experience is it's a journey into truth with a capital T. For a variety of reasons, it's designed to unfold over time, even though the mind doesn't like that. So we need to get going here. So I am going to begin, and then I'll be back with you in a minute. Welcome to another episode of the Ultimate Freedom Teachings video series. Welcome to Brutally Honest Tuesdays, episode 3. I'm so thrilled to be here with you. Let me first, in case you're new, in case you don't know me, and you found your way here through however you found your way here. My name's Robert Scheinfeld. I'm a New York Times best-selling author, major renegade, which I'll explain in a minute, and creator of what I call the Ultimate Freedom Experience, which is a live and an online training where I act as a guide or a coach to help people to what I call awaken ultimate freedom in their lives, in their stories, unblock themselves, and have a radically different experience of life. I call myself a renegade, and this particular show is called Brutally Honest Tuesdays for a reason. And the reason is, at the time of this recording, I'm 61 years old. And for the vast majority of my life, I was not a happy camper. My life was a mess. I couldn't consistently create anything, experience anything that I wanted. I either didn't get what I wanted, I got it and lost it. I got it and didn't enjoy it the way I thought that I would. There was an emptiness to it. Constant anger and frustration and stress and problems with relationships and ups and downs in business. My life just was not working. And so probably like you and millions of people all over the world, I went on a search of how could I change my life? Change, fix, and improve my life is the language that I use. And I tried all the typical kinds of things, the popular things, the visible things, and nothing worked for me. And so one day, and if you know the story from the Busting Loose book or the Phase 2 teachings, my grandfather planted some seeds in my mind when I was 12 years old that contributed to this, but ultimately one day I came to the conclusion, okay, what most people are teaching, it doesn't work. There's got to be something else going on. There's got to be something that they don't know, something that they're not talking about, something they don't see clearly. And so I'm going to leave all the typical visible stuff everyone else is teaching alone. And I'm going to go in search of my own answers because I got to find a way to fix my own life. Again, change, fix, and improve it. And so I call this Brutally Honest Tuesdays because on that journey and when I ultimately did discover what's really going on, which is what this episode, the previous two, last week was about, and probably the next two will continue to be about, I'm not sure, is what really creates reality, what's really going on behind the scenes, what really shapes what happens to you every day. And what I discovered goes against the grain of 99.9% of what's taught out there. I discovered that there's either no, it doesn't really work that way, or yeah, but, or kind of, but kind of not. And so that's where the renegade teachings that ultimately led to the Ultimate Freedom Experience were born. And so in this show, my intention, and the reason it's called Brutally Honest Tuesdays is because every week, if you don't know already, I'm going to be brutally honest about a particular topic. And in the beginning, we're talking about what really creates your reality, what's really shaping what happens to you. As the show continues, I'll take a brutally honest look and share the truth with a capital T through my biased eyes on different topics, but we're starting out with this one. And by the way, this is episode 3. It's the second episode about what really creates your reality. So if you haven't seen the previous episode where we started that discussion, or the first episode, my strong suggestion to you, I know you're busy, is to go back at some point when it works for you. I'll show you how in a minute, to the archives and make sure, particularly I would say for the first 5 or 6 episodes that kind of build on one another and they're cumulative and they plant seeds and lay a foundation. Very important to be aware of all of it. So that's my invitation to you. So a couple quick announcements, and then we'll dive in. First, if you have not already gotten my guide to living an unblocked life, I would invite you to go to the address on my website that you can see there in green and download a copy of my guide. It will give you some basic information, and it will open the door to a multi-step video training that will take you more deeply into the kinds of things that we're talking about here in this show and that I talk about in other ways. So if you've not yet read the guide and gone through that gateway into that multi-step video training, I invite you to do that. Also, later this month, I will be starting another group on Facebook that's called Living the Unblocked Life. You can access it at the URL that you see on your screen there, again on my website. It's not going to be live streaming video like this. It's not a weekly show, but it's a group on Facebook that's specifically designed to support people in unblocking themselves, living the unblocked life. So if you haven't already, you might want to check that out. And then the other thing is, I'll mention this at the end, to watch previous episodes of the show and to subscribe to my email list for this show, Brutally Honest Tuesdays, which I strongly suggest that you do. There will be a variety of benefits and bonuses and things that I can give you if you subscribe to that list. You can go to this, again, another URL on my website, robertscheinfeld.com/BHT for Brutally Honest Tuesdays. You can get access to the previous episodes, other training videos and updates, plus subscribe to that email list. So, these are things to consider. And so, having said that, we're going to continue today. Oh, I forgot. Here's the quote of the week. If you don't know, I plan to offer a quote every week that's very, very supportive to the topic for that particular week. So here's the quote for this week. Love is from another realm. We cannot manufacture it on demand, nor can we subdue it when it appears. Love is not our choice to make. And that's a quote from a character in a book by Dan Brown called Origin. And I strongly recommend this book. There is some support for the journey into truth with a capital T in it. It's also, just to my bias, a great story. And so that's where that quote comes from. If you're wondering why I'm using that today, it will become more clear as we go into today's content. And then after I share the content, I'll show you that quote again, and I think it'll have a different significance to you. So let me just double check before we continue. If you can see me and hear me okay, would you please hit a Y in the chat box so that I can see? And by the way, in the content that I'm about to start sharing with you, you're going to see me ask you a lot of times, yes or no. I'm going to say to you, say yes or no. Put it in the chat box, please. And I really would appreciate it if you would, so that I can see that you're participating, that you're hearing, and that we're engaging with each other and interacting. If for whatever reason you aren't willing to do that, or it's not convenient, whatever, then say the yes or no out loud, if you would, so that you can interact and participate that way. It's very, very important as I'm going through the stuff I'm about to go through that you acknowledge whether what I'm saying is a yes or a no to you, and then I'll address it. So again, say it out loud to yourself, or I suppose you could say it quietly in your mind, and I'd prefer it, I'd really appreciate it if you'd actually type, and I'm going to ask you to do it a lot, so you may feel like it's too much. But I'd appreciate it if I could see yes, Y for yes and N for no in the chat box. So today's topic is part 2 of what really creates our reality. Now, last week, and again, I invite you to go back and watch it if you haven't, I talked about, the whole thing about that your thoughts create your reality, your thoughts plus your feelings, your intentions, what you focus on, what you visualize, that's the party line out there. That's what really creates your reality. And last week, we pushed on, we took a brutally honest look at that, and I shared, well, not really, because how many times have your thoughts been really focused on something bad happening, but it didn't actually happen? How many times have your thoughts, your techniques, whatever, been focused on wanting something really good to happen and it didn't happen? And then the third scenario that blows all those things out of the water is that you and I, all of us, have had really good things as we perceive them, really bad things as we perceive them happen, that we never thought about, ever. Never focused on, never intended, never used a technique to do, they just happened. And so the brutally honest truth that I pushed on last week was, if you look brutally honestly with clear vision at what happens to you every day, there has to be something else going on that is either completely shaping, which is my bias, or at least modifying and controlling the things that we try to do. And so now we're going to go deeper into that. What really creates your reality? What's really going on? What's the truth about what's really going on in our lives day to day? So to go deeper, I prepared a series of presentation slides to go through where I'm going to share things with you and then ask you questions, and then I'll come back. So let's dive right into that now. Now, we could spend 20 million years on this, but I'm going to move through it quickly. While we are awake and aware, our human experience every day at its core takes place in what I call two spaces. There's what I call inner space, and there's what I call story space. Now, as the names would suggest, inner space means things that happen inside of you, and story space means things that happen outside of you. Story space is a new label for me for what I used to refer to, if you're aware of the earlier teachings that I shared, as the illusion, the hologram, three-dimensional reality, or the storyline. So these are new labels for me, and we're going to take a look at both. Now here is the content of inner space. All day long, these three things appear in inner space as you live your life. You have thoughts, you have feelings and emotions, same thing, different words, and you experience sensations like pain, itching, whatever. So here's my question to you. Which of those thoughts, feelings, and sensations can you actually control reliably and consistently? This is what we're going to push on here, and I'm asking you to take a look and be brutally honest. Here's some questions to hammer on that. Do you have any control over which thoughts appear in your mind? Yes or no? Put a Y or an N in the chat box or in the comments to give me your answer, please. Play with me here. I want everybody to see, and I want you to reinforce the truth for yourself. Do you have any control over how thoughts appear in your mind? Yes or no? Please put a Y or an N in the chat box. Do you have any control over how long thoughts that appear in your mind stay in your mind? Yes or no? In the chat box, please. Can you make unwanted thoughts disappear on demand? Reliably and consistently, yes or no? Please put your Y or your N in the chat box. Now here's my answer to all of that if we're brutally honest, and this is looking at myself, and this is now dealing with tens of thousands of people all over the world. The answer is no. We cannot reliably and consistently control any of that. Do you have any control over which emotions that you experience? The answer is no. Do you choose to be angry when you find yourself angry? Yes or no? Chat box, please. Do you choose to be happy? Now, some people would argue with this and they offer all kinds of techniques, but in general, do you choose it? Do you create it? Do you manifest it? Do you consciously make happiness happen? Yes or no? In the chat box, please. Do you choose to be sad? Do you choose, manifest, create, whatever you want to call it, being peaceful? Again, some people would argue with me on this, but I'm pushing on it, and I'm asking you to be brutally honest. Do you choose to be depressed when that's your experience? Did you create it, manifest it, intend it, make it happen on purpose, consciously? Yes or no? In the chat box, please. The answer is no. Can you manufacture whatever emotional states you want, on demand, whenever you want? Yes or no? The truthful, brutally honest answer is no. Can you consistently make unwanted emotions go away? Yes or no? Chat box, please. The answer is, the brutally honest, truthful answer is no. Now, there are some people who will say that sometimes they are able to modify what they're feeling or make negative emotions go away by doing whatever it is that they've learned, a particular technique or whatever. But not consistently, not reliably, not on demand. If we are brutally honest, there could be an exception, I guess. There's exceptions to everything. But if I look at what my experience used to be like before Ultimate Freedom awakened and the experience of the people that come into my sphere of influence, the answer is no. There's an ongoing battle. There's an ongoing war. There's an ongoing fight with the emotions that appear. Do you choose to experience the sensation called pain? Yes or no? Do you choose to experience the sensation called itching if that's something that you struggle with or ever have? These are just some random examples. Yes or no? Chat box, please. Do you choose to experience a headache? When you have a headache, did you choose it? Did you create it? Did you intend it? Did you make it happen consciously? Yes or no? Chat box, please. Do you choose to experience the sensation called a backache if you have problems with back pain or some other part of your body? Yes or no? Chat box, please. Do you choose to experience soreness after working out if that's something that happens with you? Again, did you consciously create it, intend it, manifest it, make it happen consciously? Yes or no? Again, the answer is no to all those questions if you are brutally honest and you look at the truth of it. Can you consistently make unwanted sensations go away? Yes or no? The answer is no. Nobody will say that they can consistently and reliably make unwanted sensations go away. Again, the truth is most of us have an ongoing battle, fight, and war with things that the body is doing. Okay, here's some other questions, and I want you to take a look at these and be brutally honest. If you're like I used to be, you've never thought about this kind of stuff, even though you see it happening every day, all day. Do you choose and decide if you're going to like a book that you read? Yes or no? Chat box, please. I know I'm asking you to do this a lot. I know everybody isn't going to do it every time, but please play with me at least a little bit. Do you choose and decide if you're going to like a movie that you watch? Yes or no? You can say it out loud to yourself or in your mind if you don't want to use the chat box, but I would appreciate reinforcement of all of this so everyone can see the answers to these questions. Do you choose and decide if you're going to like a TV show episode that you watch? Yes or no? Do you choose or decide if you're going to like a new person that you meet for the first time? Yes or no? Do you decide if you're going to like or choose a beverage that you try for the first time? Is this a conscious thing? Do you choose and decide if you're going to like a food that you try for the first time? Yes or no? Do you decide consciously, intentionally, who you are attracted to, romantically or sexually? Do you make all of that happen? Yes or no? Do you choose and decide how you respond to anything in the moment, truth be told? Yes or no? The answer to all of that is no. So then the big question is, if you're not doing it, if you're not choosing it, if you're not deciding it, if you're not consciously making any of these things I've talked about, and a lot of other things I could talk about, then what's really going on? That's the important question we need to look at together here. All right, now let's take a look at story space. Story space, again, is my label for people, places, and things. People, places, and things appear in story space, in my language, including your body. So if you're brutally honest, what can you actually control in story space, reliably and consistently, on demand? Can you reliably and consistently control other people? Yes or no? Chat box, please. Can you reliably and consistently control your body? Now, some people would say, yes, they can control certain things about their bodies some of the time. But can you consistently and reliably control what's happening with your body? Do you determine if you're going to get sick or not? Do you determine if you're going to have back pain or any of the other stuff, as we talked about before? Yes or no? Can you control what happens with the stock market? Now, you can say, Robert, you're being ridiculous. Maybe I am, but I'm pointing to these things. These are things that really affect our lives. Can you control reliably and consistently the weather? Yes or no? Can you control reliably and consistently your competitors if you're in business? Can you guarantee that you will achieve all of the goals that you set? Now, these are just some random examples to push on this point. I could use a lot of other ones. Again, we could go into this for 20 million years. But what I'm pointing at here is what that goes on in story space outside of you in the world, including your body, do you really have control over? Look closely and be brutally honest. What can you actually control in story space reliably and consistently? Nothing. Now, some people would argue with me on this, and they would have a lot of evidence. And some people would argue with me about that, and it's just a belief that they have. It's what I call a lie, illusion, and a story that they have accepted as true. But if you're brutally honest, you will say that you can't control anything. And best case, you'd say, well, most of what happens in story space, I cannot control. But some people would argue with me and say, but I can control this, this, and this. And if I was actually having a conversation with them, I could show them, because I do this in my ultimate freedom experience all the time. And I'm not arguing, and I'm not browbeating anybody, and I'm not trying to force my beliefs. It's just through a dialogue you can see that you have control, consistent and reliable control over nothing that happens in story space if you are brutally honest. It's obvious that we cannot control what's happening in inner space or story space if we look closely and we're brutally honest. So then again, I ask you, if we're not really controlling all of this, if we're not making it happen consciously, intentionally, whatever, so then what's really going on? What is really creating what's happening in inner space and in story space every day in our lives? Well, here's the truth. I'll give it to you. The truth is, things happen in inner space and story space every day, all day long. Somehow they get created, they happen, they appear, and we become aware of them. Stuff happens in inner space and story space in your life every day somehow, and you become aware of it. You don't do any of it. You don't create any of it. It all just happens, and then you become aware of it. Repeated for emphasis, things happen in inner space and story space somehow, and you become aware of them. That's the truth. You can verify this for yourself. If you look with clear eyes, clear vision, and you're brutally honest, don't take my word for it. It's not a theory. It's not a philosophy. You can verify this for yourself if you look at inner space and story space every day and you're brutally honest. Something to consider, eh? All right, now, like everything else that I have shared in the past on this show and that I will continue to share on this show, there are certain things like what I just shared with you that you will have conscious awareness of the significance of, and at other times it will be this. It's designed to be drops in the pond of your awareness, your consciousness, your mind, your life, whatever you want to call it, that while you're listening, after you're listening, and this is what the ultimate freedom experience that I offer online and live is all about, is ripples and things that over time can make deep, profound, and permanent changes inside of you first that then ripple out and change outside of you. So those are the drops in the pond for this week. Now, I was monitoring, and by the way, I was monitoring all of this, and for those of you that are watching on my website, when I was monitoring, it looked like some of those slides got a little bit blurry, and I'd like to know if that was just me or if that was your experience too. So if some of the text and things on those slides were blurry, could you please put a B in the text box, in the chat box, comments, only if you are on the website. Every week that I do this, I find ways of making it better and correcting problems and issues, so I'd like to know if it was just me or if other people saw that blurriness, which would create something that I can fix in the future. So, to me, and the mind can make up all kinds of stories, what I call lies, illusions, and stories, the cloud-covered dynamics from phase 1, if you know about the Busting Loose phase 2 teachings, can be very seductive. They can be very hypnotic, and things that are not true can seem to be true. And as I was watching the chat boxes and the comments, I was seeing mostly no's to the questions, which to me is the truth, and I saw some yeses. And my bias is that the answer to all of those questions, if you look closely and you're brutally honest, is no. Now, there's a lot of people, a lot of minds, what I call the mind machine, that look at what I just pushed on in this episode, and if you were on the last episode, about what really creates your reality, part 1. A lot of minds can make up stories. Oh God, I don't want that to be true. That's bad news. I don't want to, it's not good that I'm not in control of anything, that stuff just happens and I'm aware of it. That's not good news. I want to be the powerful one. I want to be able to create my reality. I want to be able to bend reality to my will. Don't tell me, Robert, and I'm sure I'm going to lose a lot of people that check out this show or check out the replays because I'm pushing on this. But this is Brutally Honest Tuesdays, and so that's what I'm doing. But to me, it's obvious if you are brutally honest and you look with clear vision, what I pushed on here, whether it's inside of you with thoughts, feelings, and sensations, as I talked about, or it's outside of you in your relationships, in your business, with your finances, in the world, with other things that are important to you, whether you compete in athletics or things with your kids, whatever it is, the reality is stuff just happens every day, and we are aware of it. And there may be a lot of stuff in your mind, particularly if you studied spiritual things, metaphysical things, create your reality things, whatever, that say that you are creating it or you have a say in it or your thoughts, feelings, sensations, intentions, what you do with technique shape it. To me, the reality is that's not true. And as I said, that can be interpreted as bad news, but what I discovered is it's the best news ever. It's what opens a major doorway. Now, first of all, truth is truth. And that's the truth. And again, you can verify this for yourself if you just look at your own life and you're brutally honest. It's not a theory. It's not a philosophy. It's not my opinion. Sometimes the lies, illusions, and stories are so strong and so hypnotic and seductive that we can try to look and we don't see clearly, but you can verify this. So first of all, it's just true if you look and you're brutally honest. But beyond that, it opens a doorway. Admitting this, acknowledging this, seeing this clearly, opens a gateway. It opens a doorway that enables you to get closer to experiencing truth with a capital T, and that's what happened to me. Tried everything, tried to exert my power, bend reality to my will, create what I wanted, all this stuff. Nothing worked. I went in search of the truth in my own way, set into motion by my grandfather's words to me when I was younger. And this is one of the first things that I had to be brutally honest about, admit and acknowledge to myself. I am not in charge. I'm not driving the bus. Something else is going on. And that opens a doorway to the next question. We'll talk about this in future episodes, which is, okay, if it's not me, and it's not my thoughts and intentions and technique use, whatever, then what is? You know, what's really creating the thoughts that I have, the feelings that I have, the sensations that I experience? If these things are just happening and I'm aware of them, why are they happening the way that they're happening? Who or what is actually creating it and why? And what's the point to all of it? You know? So these are the things that we're going to continue to push on. And again, what I've talked about here, this is the ripples in your pond for today. And so that's what I wanted to share today in terms of in this first section. That's what I wanted to share with you today. So a couple quick announcements and then we will move into the Q&A. And let me just say before the announcements, and you may notice that I'm repeating certain things. That's because with this live streaming, people come and go, people come late, and there's certain important things that I want to share that I'm going to repeat. But I want to remind you, if you don't already know, if you have a question to ask me and you're going to type it into the chat box or the comments, please put a Q for question with a colon in front of it so that if there's a lot, I can scan and just look for the Qs. If you don't do that, I may miss your question and I may miss your comment. And if there's a lot of questions, you know, my commitment is to be here until 12 noon. So if I cannot answer all of the questions, I apologize in advance. Sometimes I can, sometimes I can't. In the future, my intention is to create some other way of answering the questions that I can't answer live on the show. And so that's another reason to subscribe to my email list. Here again is how to do that. If you go to that page, you can click through to subscribe to my email list for this show. And by the way, I'm not going to blitz you with all kinds of stuff. I'm just going to talk about things related to this show. And that probably is how I'll answer questions that I don't have time to answer if there's too many on this. So Couple quick announcements, and then again, type questions that you have only about the content from today. Or it could be the content from last week in terms of what creates your reality. If you don't already know, I don't answer questions about the books or my live or online experiences here. The questions and answers and dialogue in this segment of the show is only about what I've talked about on the show. So if you type something else in, I'm going to tell you right now, I'm going to ignore it. I'm not going to answer it. I'll go through questions first, and if there's comments, it just depends how it appears to me. So again, if you have a question to ask, type a Q with a colon first and then your question, so it's easy for me to see. And I just want to repeat, if you've not already gotten a copy of my guide on living the unblocked life, and by the way, if you're aware of the teachings that I share, I use 3 terms. They're different words. They mean the same thing. Living an unblocked life is one term that I use. Phase 3 is another term that I use. Ultimate freedom is another term that I use. They all point to the same thing, experiencing truth with a capital T all day long, every day, no matter what's going on. So this guide will start you on a journey going more deeply into what I've talked about here, and open a doorway to a multi-step video training that will take you deeper. So if you haven't already gotten the guide, I invite you to. And soon, sometime this month, I will be starting a group on Facebook called Living the Unblocked Life, which you might want to check out. It's not live streaming video like this. It's not a weekly show. It'll be a group that will be designed to have people come together and support each other in unblocking their lives and discussing what the journey is like and stuff. You might want to check that out. Here again is the quote of the week, which may appear differently to you now after I went through what I went through. Love is from another realm. We cannot manufacture it on demand, nor can we subdue it when it appears. Love is not our choice to make. Again, it was one of the questions that I asked you. I don't know if, I can't remember if I used the word love specifically. I think I said who you're attracted to or whatever, but love is something that just happens. If you fall in love with somebody, it just happens. You don't choose it, you don't create it, you don't manifest it. It just happens or it doesn't. And sometimes people will say, I don't love you anymore. I fell out of love with you. Same thing. It's something that can happen. It isn't something that we do, which begs the question, as I mentioned, if we aren't controlling it, if all of these things are happening, how and why? And how can I ultimately embrace the truth of all of that, what's really going on, and therefore shift how I live my life every day? These are the bigger questions that we then move into once we acknowledge the truth that something else other than us, our thoughts, our feelings, our techniques, our intentions, whatever has been your technique of preference, it's what opens the door to go more deeply into truth. So that said, let's go into Q&A and comments. And so let's see what we got here. Liz, the slides were fine at my end. Good. Maura Rose had to type in Y or N so I couldn't see the slides, Robert. Okay, I'm not sure I understand that. They should both have been on the screen simultaneously, but we'll take a look at that. All right, so let's take a look again. If you have questions, Martin says the quote makes sense now. Cool. Again, forgive me for having to look away at this point. I have on my screen here is where I can see the questions and comments. I didn't want to put a notebook computer right here, although maybe I will, but I have to look away at either way to read. So let's see what we got here. Let me go up here. Dara, again, I apologize if I'm mispronouncing that. Partially, I want to be a powerful co-creator. What is the balance? Again, to me, my life, I ultimately moved into becoming what I call an objective scientist. That's just my language. I don't care what my mind says. I moved to. I don't care what anybody else says. I'm going to look at what's actually going on in my own life and in my language and inner space or story space, and throw out all the other stuff. I'm just going to be brutally honest about what's actually happening that I can actually verify and see and experience from my own personal experience. And so to me, it depends how you define you, which we'll get into in a future episode because it's a bigger discussion. But if you're brutally honest and you look at what's actually going on every day, I know that the spiritual teachings say it, and I know the manifestation, attraction, whatever, metaphysical, esoteric, new age, whatever you want to call it, I know they say that we are or we can be co-creators of our reality and all that kind of stuff. But if you look, and this is my invitation to you, you're not co-creating anything. Not Robert, not this body, not this character, not you, Dara, or again, whatever, if I'm mispronouncing your name. If you really look, we're not co-creating anything. Now, you're welcome to disagree with that. You're welcome to think I'm an idiot or I'm crazy or whatever and leave here and slam the door and never come near me again. But to me, my invitation to you is look. Now, I know that for certain people it seems like, and there were some comments to this effect, sometimes it seems like I do get what I want. Sometimes it does seem like when I use a technique or I focus on something or I intend something or I do a vision board or whatever, it seems like sometimes, I mean, the percentage is tiny if you look, but it seems like sometimes I do get stuff. And so it seems like sometimes I have the ability to co-create, but my bias and experience and what I go into detail on in the Ultimate Freedom Experience, live or online, is even when it seems like it's coming from your thoughts, your intentions, something that you did, something that you intended, whatever, it's still coming from somewhere else. And we'll go more deeply into this later. I talk about it more in the training that flows out of the guide that I talked to you about. And we go deeply into this again in the Ultimate Freedom Experience. But I know, because I was there, of the hunger to want to be the creator of your reality, or at least the co-creator of your reality. But my experience, and again, what I invite you to consider, and it may be hard now, it may be hard forever, is that the brutally honest truth is you're not, you cannot be, and you never will be. And again, that's not bad news. It's the best news ever because it opens the door to what I call Ultimate Freedom, Phase 3, living an unblocked life. So that's what I have to say about that. Let me see here. Alice says, how does getting unblocked work, or is this part of the process to be revealed? Well, again, if you're the way I used to be, Alice, and the way probably the vast majority of people who are watching this are, the mind always wants, give me something to do. Give me a technique. Give me a method. Give me a practice. Give me the 5 steps. If I do this, 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 and this, then I can unblock myself. And again, that's the way that I was until ultimately my journey and the failure of everything dynamited that. The truth is, and we will go more deeply into this in future episodes, and I go into it more again in the training that comes from the guide and in the Ultimate Freedom Experience, is it's something that happens. And it's something that happens driven by the intelligence with a capital I, the consciousness with a capital C, what I call true creative essence now. That's who you really are. It's something that can happen in your life. If you remember what I said before, is stuff just happens every day. And then we become aware of it. And even if it seems like we're doing it, we're not. It's still coming from somewhere else. And unblocking your life is the same thing. It's something that can happen. And there can appear to be some cause and effect or some support, some help from somewhere to make that happen. The Ultimate Freedom Experience that I offer is a way that you can get help to do that can set things into motion. But ultimately, it's something that just happens. It's a journey that you begin, and the destination of the journey is living an unblocked life, experiencing ultimate freedom. Making the leap into phase 3, if you know that language. It's something that happens. It's something that unfolds in your life. It isn't something that you can speed up or fast forward or manifest or have happen like this, but it's something that does and can happen, and that's what happened to me, by the way. We'll talk more about this later. Ultimately, when I acknowledge the truth and I let go, so to speak, that's not accurate language. It happened in my life, in my story. The unblocked life happened. The ultimate freedom awakened is my language. The leap was made into phase 3. I didn't do it. I wanted it certainly, years, decades before, but it's something that just happened after an extraordinary journey. That's what I now help people to take. Open a gateway into that journey, support them on the journey, guide them on the journey, play a role as this is all unfolding in their story. How do you know you are really living an unblocked life or not? Felix, you just know. There's no better way for me to answer that question. The mind right now is trying to figure out, your mind, what something's going to be like that you haven't experienced yet. And so when you think about it, it seems like, well, I might miss it. How would I know? But the reality is, when it happens, you know. It means something specific that we'll get into later. And when it happens, you know. There's no doubt, and the mind doesn't buzz and whir, as I call it, trying to figure out, well, am I living an unblocked life yet? You just know at a very deep level. That's the best answer that I can give you. Felix also says, does each of us have a separate reality? That's a really big question. Felix, it's not something that I can answer here in a couple of seconds, and it depends on how you define a lot of the terms, but to me, the literal answer to your question, do we all have a separate reality? The answer would be yes, for a variety of reasons. Ivan says, would you agree that your experience is only yours and not someone else's? Absolutely. But again, one of the things that happened to me when I said, again, objective scientist, and this is all over the Ultimate Freedom Experience, and when I play the role of coach with people, is it doesn't matter whether I agree or not. It doesn't matter what I think, and it doesn't matter what you believe or what you think. The question is, look at your own experience. You have thoughts, feelings, and sensations that appear in inner space in my language. They're not someone else's. You can say to somebody, I thought da-da-da-da, whatever, but they're still not having your experience. And even if you're both in the same room, or you're having dinner together or whatever else, and you'd say, wow, we're sitting in the same restaurant, we're looking at the same things, it's still different. So if you look at your own experience, your experience is your experience, and it's all custom designed for you, yes, and it's no one else's, and no one else can access it. It's unique to you. All right, let's see. I haven't looked over on my website, so let me see here. I'm looking for cues. Joy asks, what is reality? Does it get defined to us as we live on? Again, to me, Joy, no disrespect intended. This is the mind complicating something that's really simple. What's reality? Reality is what you are actually experiencing, what's actually happening with you. And there are two parts to that I talk about in the Ultimate Freedom Experience. There's what I call the pure raw experience, which is what's actually happening. And then I use my fist to illustrate that. And then there's the story that the mind makes up about it. So reality is two things. It's what we're experiencing every day, and what we're actually experiencing. And again, in my language, what's appearing in inner space, what's happening in story space. That's reality. But it has two pieces to it. What's actually happening, and then the story that the mind makes up about it. And usually the story that the mind makes up about it is not true. But that's all that reality is. There's no big woo-woo metaphysical whatever. It just, to me, reality is what's actually happening, the truth of what's actually happening. Last week I called it being in a truthful relationship, or I think in the first episode. My language is being in a truthful, with a capital T, relationship with what's actually happening to you inside, inner space, outside, story space. That's reality to my bias. Liz, what would you call that part of us that wants to believe we have control? The ego? Again, this is Brutally Honest Tuesday, so I'm going to be brutally honest. It doesn't matter what I call it. It doesn't matter what you call it. It doesn't matter what 1,000 other people call it. It's there, and that's all that matters. Most people that teach the kinds of things that you're probably aware of would call that ego, but other people would call it different things. It doesn't matter what you call it. If you just look, there is this desire in a lot of people, most people that I know that have been on a personal development, spiritual development path, there's just this hunger, there's this desire. I want to have power. I want to be able to create my reality. I want to be able to have a way to get it's just there, and that's all that matters. And what you call it is irrelevant. Again, this is one of the things that my journey took me to. I used to spend a lot of time and energy trying to understand stuff and figure stuff out and understand terminology and learning new things. And then ultimately I realized, who cares? It's got to have practical benefit for me. You know, it's got to affect my life and what's really going on. And the label doesn't matter. And the label would be different for different people and in different languages and everything else. Liz says, oh, I just said that one, sorry. Julie says, as we break up the cloud cover, but not completely living in the truth / phase 3, how do we interact with others? It's awkward for me and I tend to stay away from friends because when I am with them and they don't see life the way I do and don't want to participate in drama, it can feel lonely for me at this point. Julie, that's a gigantic question. I can't do justice to it here in the limited space that we have. You're coming to the live Ultimate Freedom experience at my house that's coming up in September. We'll go into it there, but the reality is, here's the truth, the brutally honest truth. For all of us, we wake up in the morning, and as I mentioned today, stuff happens all day long, and then we go to sleep. And then we wake up the next morning, and stuff happens, and then we go to sleep. And as I've mentioned, we don't create any of it. We don't shape any of it. We don't decide any of it. It just happens. And so the simple answer to your question is, there's no rule or formula or technique that I can give you. Here's how to be with other people about anything. Here's how to be with other people if you are aware of some truthful with a capital T things and they're not. Here's what to do when you feel lonely. There isn't any one way to deal with that. There isn't any perfect way to deal with it. It's different for all of us. And it is what will happen every day. And on this journey, it changes on its own. And you are certain ways with certain people. And that happens, and that happens, and that happens. And then it changes a little bit. And then it changes a little bit. And then it changes a little bit. And then one day you wake up and whammo, there's a hugely different thing that's happening that you're aware of in terms of how you're interacting with other people. So that's the best, simple, quick answer. Again, the mind always wants a formula. The mind always wants a rule. The mind always wants a technique. Every time this happens, or I want this, I should do that. Anytime I have this problem, I should do this to fix it. The mind is built to want that. But what I discovered is there isn't any one thing that's the answer to that. And on this journey, as cloud cover gets knocked out in my language, as more and more sun shines in my language, as ultimate freedom awakens, as we move into living the unblocked life, this stuff just takes care of itself. Again, you wake up and one morning and you notice things are a little different, and then a little more different, and then a little more different, and then whammo, one day, hugely different. But it's something that just happens on a journey that unfolds over time, doesn't happen in a lightning bolt, instantaneous moment. Liz says, does it matter to know where or who gave us this hunger for power? Yes and no. Ultimately, not really. But when I offer the Ultimate Freedom Experience and we go through all of this step by step and I open doorways and gateways and coach and support and guide people on this journey into ultimate freedom, living an unblocked life, we talk about it. But it's a very minor piece of the puzzle. What's much more important, as I've mentioned, is being in a truthful relationship with what's actually happening. The only thing that really matters is the hunger there, yes or no? If it's there, it's there. It's, again, minor where it comes from and why it's there, but the most important thing is it's there. And so that's the most important piece there. All right, let's see. Alice says, thank you for that, Robert. Perhaps the truth is letting go. Well, again, no disrespect intended, Alice. That's something that's in a lot of spiritual teachings. It's in a lot of psychological teachings. You need to surrender. You need to let go. You need to this. You need to that. My bias is, and I invite you to look at whether this is true from your own experience. It's not an idea or a concept or a theory or a philosophy. My bias from my own experience is I can't. I don't have the power or the ability to be able to let go. I don't have the power or the ability, Robert, to be able to surrender. Now, what we call letting go happens on this journey. What people would call surrender happens on this journey. But my bias and experience is we can't do it. Again, some other force, some other intelligence, I call it true creative essence now, is ultimately creating what's happening to us every day that we then become aware of. Who we really are, that intelligence, that true creative essence, again, is my label, that can cause letting go to happen or surrender to happen, but we can't. And again, if you doubt this, odds are, if you are aware of that, you have been trying, not you, Alice, necessarily, everybody. You've been trying to let go of stuff. You've been trying to surrender. You've been trying to stop judging. You've been trying to stop being angry. You've been trying to stop judging, being negative about how someone else is behaving with you, and you can't. But it is something that can happen, and it is something that does happen on this journey. When ultimate freedom awakens, when you're living the unblocked life, when the leap is made into phase 3, what we would call letting go and surrendering happens, but it isn't something we can choose to do. We can make happen, we can manifest, create, whatever, with a technique or a practice. That's my bias. I invite you to verify it from your own experience. Doesn't matter what I think. It matters what you can actually see and experience and see in your own life if you're brutally honest. That's what this is all about. All right, let's see. Dara says, I am willing and I do surrender. I'm going to stop there. My bias is you don't surrender, like I just said, although maybe sometimes that's what happens. That's what appears. But you don't do it. It just randomly happens sometimes, and you then, the mind says, oh, I did that. But that's my bias. Verify it for yourself. But what do I do with my hopes and dreams? Some manifest, some do not. Do I forget about those that don't manifest? Okay, again, the mind wants to know. What do I do? 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 I used to be like this all this time. It used to drive me nuts. And I also used to get confused because if you look around and you consult the experts, almost everybody, the experts disagree. No matter what you're trying to create in your life, if you really go out and you do your due diligence and you absorb information from a lot of experts, most of them disagree and they'll tell you to do something different. So it's crazy. It used to drive me nuts, and then I would try it all and it wouldn't work. So again, on this journey, I'm starting from the assumption of what I've pushed on today. Everything just happens in your day-to-day life, in inner space and story space, and you become aware of who you really are. Some other force with a capital F, whatever you want to call it, is creating. You become aware of it. So desires appear. We're aware of them. Before taking this journey, before ultimate freedom awakens, before living an unblocked life, before making the leap into phase 3, we try to get these things, and most of the time we fail. On this journey, a number of things happen, but it's a journey, and it's designed to unfold over time, not the way the mind wants it, which is yesterday, or instantly lightning bolt moment. It's designed to unfold over time, slowly but surely. We'll talk about the reasons for that later, and it's in the Ultimate Freedom Experience. So all of this stuff just takes care of itself. Once ultimate freedom is fully awake, in my language, once you're actually living the unblocked life, what tends to happen is either, and again, there's no one way that it looks, but what tends to happen is either a desire for something appears and you go, oh, okay, there's a desire for whatever that just appeared in inner space. Big deal. Who cares? We'll see what happens. So you're aware of it if it happens. Maybe it does, maybe it does, doesn't matter. And by the way, that's the same thing that happens to you if you're reading a novel, you're watching a movie, you're watching a TV show, and a character in the story wants something. You don't think about it consciously, but as you're reading the story, watching the story, and somebody has a desire in the story, you go, oh, they want da-da-da-da. You're aware of it. You don't care. Doesn't make any difference to you. And then you wait to see what's going to happen. Are they going to get it? Are they not? Is it going to be easy? Is it going to be hard or whatever? So that can happen. Or desires for things don't appear that are not part of what I call your mission, your purpose, what would really make you happy, what your story is really all about. But the net of it is, those are the two ways that it tends to look. And there's other variations. But bottom line, it takes care of itself. Again, the reality is, every day we wake up, stuff happens, we go to sleep. We wake up the next day, stuff happens, we go to sleep. We wake up the next day, stuff happens, we go to sleep. On this journey into ultimate freedom, into living an unblocked life, into phase 3. You same thing, except you go to sleep, you wake up, and over time, what happens starts to change. You aren't doing it, you aren't manifesting it, you aren't attracting it, you aren't creating it, but it starts to change. And then it changes a little more and you go to sleep. And then you wake up, and over time, huge things change. And this is what happened with me. So your desires, whether you get them, whether you don't, what you think about getting them or not getting them, all of this, it just changes on its own naturally as a byproduct of, in my language, knocking out cloud cover, getting into a truthful with a capital T relationship with it, experiencing the truth of what's really going on. It takes care of itself. You don't have to figure it out. You don't have to resolve it. You don't have to have a strategy in advance for what to do about it. It takes care of itself. And this makes life so much easier, which is something we'll talk about later. I'm seeing here where we have questions. Diane tuning in late. Dan, look forward to the replay. This is an important one to watch the replay on entirely if you haven't seen the whole thing, definitely. As is the previous episode and the ones that are going to come, because this is going to be, again, a multi-part series, what really creates our reality. This is part 2. There's going to be more parts. David says, if I'm driving a car and need to put fuel in my car and I do that, am I not controlling the story space? Again, David, the mind can argue about what I've talked about forever. But the reality is, it happens. You're driving. You notice you're out of gas. You notice that you stop. You notice that you get out of the car and you put the gas thing. And the mind says, I did it all. But the reality is, and this is the best I can do now, I realize there can be, I'll call it mental resistance. It all just happens and you're aware of it. And there's a lot more to this. Again, this is what I'm doing right now. Everything isn't going to be crystal clear. Everything is not going to make a lot of sense or be agreed with. But this is what this is all about. Drops in the pond. There's an NLP term, interrupting the pattern, which don't take too literally, but that's what this is all designed to do. And so, but that to me is the truth. When you can experience that truth, it opens the door to all kinds of other unique experiences that we would label as benefits, positive changes, whatever. But it starts with being brutally honest about what's really going on and what your role is in actually creating what happens to you every day inside inner space, outside story space. All right, we're kind of out of time, but let me just take a quick look here. There's a couple of questions that start out with, I'm curious. No disrespect intended. Anytime a question starts out with, I'm curious, or something like that, what it means is the mind's trying to understand it. And my experience is understanding is either irrelevant or it's an okay, sometimes necessary small first step, but ultimately it's meaningless. It's experience. That's what matters, not the mind understanding or thinking. So let me see here. Clark says the early Greeks never believed that they had an original thought. So instead of saying, I thought of something, they would use the phrase, the thought occurred to me. Yeah, that's the truth. That's being in a truthful relationship. But see, again, I invite you to be a little, I'll call it hyper aware of what's happening in your day-to-day life, because this is what people tell you. This is probably the language that you use. We say things like, a thought popped into my mind. You know, I was in the shower and all of a sudden, da-da-da-da. You know, our language describes the truth. And the Greeks, I guess, that were saying that were more wise. It's the truth. Again, it's not bad news. It's the best news ever. Truthfully, and it opens a major doorway into truth, ultimate freedom, phase 3, living an unblocked life. But again, this is the truth of it all. And you, again, you'll see people using language like that, not just the Greeks. This is the language that we use. I'll tell you a quick story. I'm running late here, but I'll tell you a quick story. I was watching an interview with a guy, I can't remember his name at the moment, who has a very, very successful track record of making TV shows that get onto the major United States networks and become very successful and run for many, many years. This guy made a lot of money, very, very successful with that. And he had a new show on the air that was becoming very successful. And in this interview, they said, because it's kind of the theme of the show is kind of weird. And so they said, where'd you get the idea for this show? You know, and he says, I wish I could give you a big dramatic story, but the reality is I was sitting at my computer trying to come up with ideas for shows. And I saw a video in my mind of this first scene, you know? The same thing, by the way, is true of J.K. Rowling and where did the Harry Potter stories came from. And she says this in her biographies when she's interviewed, you know? She was sitting on a train and the whole idea popped into her mind, you know? But we actually use the language and we're aware of the fact that these things happen, but we conveniently ignore it and the mind says, I did it. I figured it out. I came up with that idea. I call it the mind machine hijacks credit for something that it didn't do, you know? Anyway, we're out of time. So I'll see if I can pick up the questions from this. And if you subscribe to the list, which again, here's how to do that. robertscheinfeld.com/BHT. You can subscribe to the email list for this show. And that probably will be the way that I'll ultimately answer questions that we don't have time for here. So we're out of time for this week. Thank you very much for joining me. We will continue the discussion. Next week will be What Really Creates Reality Part 3. We'll continue to go more deeply into this. If you don't already know, the format of this show is I talk for 20 or 30 minutes after a brief introduction, and then there's about 20 or 30 minutes of Q&A, exactly what you saw here. So that's what will happen next week, but we'll go more deeply into What Really Creates Reality Part 3. I invite you to join me there. I invite you to tell others about this if you have been benefiting and enjoying however you like to share these kinds of things. I'd appreciate it. They'd appreciate it. It would be fun for you. And so I have my little close here for you, and I'll look forward to seeing you next week, if that's what happens, or to our next forum of contact, whatever shape that takes. So bye-bye for this week. See you again soon. If you haven't already, be sure to join my free Facebook group, Living the Unblocked Life. Uncover and dissolve what secretly blocks you most. You can check it out at the URL that you see on your screen.